Okay, so the whole point of this class is to consider the question, what is Jewish renewal? What is our relationship as a community to that Jewish renewal as a movement? What are my own feelings I'm exploring about Jewish renewal? And Victor, maybe you could help us understand, why you came to Jewish renewal, and maybe help us define what it is.
Well, start with the very simple question. You're going to move on to the hard ones later.
Yeah. By the way, hey, Victor, by the way, do you know that I'm here right now at they're they're in ceremony right now at this conference. This is the closing ceremony right now. So I should probably move out of the main thoroughfare. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I actually didn't come to Jewish Renewal initially. What I came to was an appreciation and a necessity to help me with the problems that were plaguing me regarding Jewish engagement at the time in the 80s and 90s. And so what I found was Reb Zalman. And so my attachment to what eventually emerged in Nadia and my life was an attachment to the ideas and the vision of Reb Zalman. And particularly, it was in line with my original outstanding teacher of Heschel that really spoke of the spirituality of Judaism and its loss since the 19th century, and the need to engage once again with that aspect of Judaism, because it always existed. It was just submerged under the rationality of the 19th and early 20th century. So what happened was, when we began to encounter Reb Zalman on a regular basis, he told us that there were other people that shared this perspective, this desire to shift the paradigm, which was exactly the language that I had learned in my graduate studies in the secular world of what was going on in science and in culture. But what was needed in Judaism was a paradigm shift. So that was the first book that I encountered with Reb Zalman. And that's what attracted me to it. And then later on, he said, hey, why don't you join the Chevra? Join the group. And I said, what group? I had no idea. And I was a rabbi in Los Angeles and had never heard of Jewish Renewal, particularly because there was none in Los Angeles at the time. So that's how we got started. Now, as far as what Jewish Renewal is, the part that is attractive to me, first of all, is its commitment to renew Judaism in accordance with both its past, its present, and its intended future. Two, that based upon my experience from childhood on in denominational Judaism, that I would call myself now more and more a post-denominational rabbi. I'm not interested anymore in the fortification of the various denominations, which are all weakening dramatically at this present time. So the emphasis on individual spiritual growth rather than the emphasis on the non-existent unity of Judaism. By this, I mean, every year when the Jewish Federation Council of Los Angeles, the second largest Jewish community in the United States, begins its fundraising campaign in Los Angeles, banners stretch across all the large boulevards where Jews live, and they say, "We are one." That's an ignorance of Jewish history from the time of Abraham on to the present time. We've never been a one-party people. And so one of the things that Reb Zalman and others taught, besides emphasizing the spiritual growth of individuals, is the creation of holy communities, which is or conscious communities, which is the title of one of the Hasidic Rebbe's of Warsaw during the Second World War period, the Zetzner Rebbe. So that is what Jewish Renewal focuses on, and its campaign, so to speak, or its platform is to focus on prayer, spiritual practices ranging from meditation to individual practice about what one eats. So Reb Zalman coined the term eco-kashrut, meditation, both Eastern and the meditation that grew up with the Kabbalists over time, and a focus for Zalman, which is Jewish Renewal focus, is prayer as a spiritual vehicle to be in tuned with God. So it's a very God-centered effort. So I hope that got most of the points. Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question for you. Not everyone in our community believes in God, or at least, that's not like a core thing for them. And not many of the folks here on the Coastside are service-going people. And, maybe it's because we haven't had a service that really, feels like, wow, this is something I really want to go to. But, we're experimenting. But so we have a four worlds model for our community, family, community, adult learning, and spirituality. So not everybody's into the spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So what does Jewish Renewal do for, the other people who aren't into spirituality?
Well, from my perspective, it's okay not to be. It doesn't make you a lesser Jew or a lesser seeker, all right? And in fact, I'm not all that committed to working just in the Jewish framework. I mean, one of the principles of Zalman very early on in both his practice and his teachings, which is truly transformational, is a term that he borrowed from Matthew Fox, which is deep ecumenism. So my engagement has been since early 2000 is the growth of interrelationship with people, irrespective of what their religion is. And if somebody doesn't have to be a shul goer, all right? I grew up, my Judaism was in the shul. But quite frankly, there are plenty of ways of designing programs to cater to the home. Everything is said about how Judaism is a religion of the home, and very little is done as far as the home goes. Let me give you one example. Before I started being a rabbi of congregations, I was an educational director in large conservative synagogues in Los Angeles. And I walked into a classroom and I heard an Israeli teacher with a heavy accent talking to a Kita Bet. So they're 7, 8 years old. And this Israeli said to the students, on Friday night, we light candles in the home. And one of these kids responded right like this, said, not in our home. And I got it. All right. And so I would decentralize most of Jewish educational work, to focus on the home in addition to focusing on individuals. And you don't have to have a platform or an ideology that says this is the way that you go, because there's never been one Judaism, ever.
Right. Okay. So even within a interfaith or, multi-faith setting, how does Jewish Renewal regard someone who might be an atheist or agnostic? Could Jewish Renewal be God optional?
That's a great question. I like the way it's phrased. What? Yeah. One of the finest congregations in the United States that's experimental and content oriented is God optional, and that's Lab Show in New York City.
Yes. Would you say that's a renewal community?
Absolutely, 100% more than most. Yeah. Let me give you a little bit of background. The notion of Jewish renewal, you have to be careful with the language. I discovered the first time the term shows up is not with Reb Zalman. It's with Martin Buber in 1908. He gave a speech in Vienna to a group of disaffected college students. Sounds familiar because it's the same platform Reb Zalman used all those years later. And the title, translated from the German, reads, "Towards a Renewal of Judaism." There's a difference. And his analysis said that what's missing is a spiritual component, because what's taken over what he called rabbinism, meaning halacha. Jewish law became the most important aspect. Did you observe Shabbat? Did you observe Kasher? Did you observe all the did you put on tefillin? All those things. So he said spirituality was the word he used. He used religiosity. That was the word, what we would call spirituality, and an end to the emphasis on behavior. All right, Judaism has been so much of a behavior religion and a behavioral response to the world that they live in, that it becomes stultifying. All right, let me give one other point. In my doctoral studies at UC Berkeley, I got the faculty to allow me to do research on Jewish education and not on public education, which was the focus, of course, of public university. And one of the things I discovered that was a huge mistake across the board, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstruction, was the curriculum said you teach the following prayers to the students, and it would be graduated to more and more prayers as the years went by. So you start with teaching the kids to say hamotzi over bread and to do the Birkat Hamazon 3 years later.
We still do that. We still do that.
Of course, and it's wrong. Why is it wrong? Because the student would really prefer and need to find out why he or she should even utter a prayer. Take them to the prayer need, all right? And don't say, this is the prayer you have to say. That's why Heschel taught the beginning of a spiritual outlook, all right, is awe, wonder, and radical amazement. So when you take a child who is existentially an awe-inspired human being, who is filled with wonder, and use that to observe the world in a state of wonder, and then say, what do you have to say about it? And that's the prayer. You don't even have to call it a prayer. Wow. All right? That's the direction, not the way I learned it. I was supposed to say 100 prayers a day. That was my education. All right. Always felt like I fell short. I only got 59 in that day. All right.
Okay, so let's see. Any reactions so far? Just want to hear if this is resonating with anybody. REA, make sure you unmute yourself.
Yes, my buddy. Unmute, REA.
Yeah, you're still muted.
Reb Victor, it's so good to hear your story. Reb Moshe, I'm thinking about, there's a story of which you gave one version last week, the punchline of which is the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. And Reb Victor, one way that Reb Solomon tells this is when they were fleeing Europe, and they were in basically a concentration camp in southern France, and there was a Jewish community there. And Reb Zalman is a teenager, right? Maybe he's just gotten bar mitzvahed. And so he hears this young rabbi, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, who later became the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but he's there in this camp in the south of France. And Reb Zalman, as a teenager, he's so mad. He's, how could there be a God? Why would God allow all this stuff to happen to the Jews? I don't believe in God. And Reb Schneerson said, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. And that influenced Reb Zalman from the time he was a teenager. The God you believe in, I don't believe in either. And it sounds like a lot of the story you're telling in response to Reb Moshe's question about, do you have to, can it be God optional? I wonder if, Jewish renewal is or can be a way that people who don't believe in God discover something deeper that they do believe in.
My teacher, Heschel, used to put this rather dramatically. He said that our purpose is to make ourselves individually and collectively worthy of God's interest in us. How do you do that? Well, that's up to every individual. I'd like to think a community could do that also. But how you show up is so varied, particularly in the Jewish realm. There are so many ways to express one's humanity. I mean, one of the things that I always got from Heschel was that he was greatly disappointed in human beings, and that his project was, if God's description of creation, because that's the way he viewed it, it was God's description of creation, not our description of creation, that to be worthy of that creation, to put us at the pinnacle of creation, then we have to show up. And if we don't, we're not worthy of being on the pinnacle. That was, while it's inspiring, I have problems with viewing humanity as the ultimate act of God's creation. I jokingly say, I'll just finish with this, that it's not without reason that the word God spelled backwards is dog. All right? And I suggest that anybody who has a golden retriever has experienced God on a daily basis, especially at feeding time. Yeah,
Vaughn,
go ahead.
you've got something to say, Vaughn.
So I happen to believe in God, but some of my friends and one of my children don't. So I started thinking about this birthday card that I bought for someone, and it said, happy birthday from the abominable snowman. He has a message for you. He doesn't believe in you either.
Good.
You know, here's one thing that might help because of the way you described the community, Rabbi, and that is don't put so much emphasis or any on the word belief in God. All right? Reb Zalman was not into belief. He used to say, when I meet a person of belief, I check my wallet in my pocket. All right? What he's interested in is people with faith. All right? And in this time, you know, one of the things that makes me really disturbed right now is the fact that we're going to be getting a new president on Martin Luther King Jr.'s day. And Saturday, Shabbos, is Professor Heschel's yahrzeit. Two amazing human beings of the 20th century. And we got to put this fearsome person in office. And so it's not a matter of belief in democracy. I have faith that democracy could well be strong enough to survive even what's coming. That's different than belief. All right.
Yeah.
And it's more in consonance with the way we work in the world, the way we incorporate hope versus fear is having faith, not beliefs. Beliefs are problematic.
Right. Heard. Oh, Wendy.
Things. One is there is a YouTube, and I'll have to find it, where Reb Zalman is talking about the difference between faith and belief. And if I find it, I'll send that over. But Reb Victor, if you could talk a little bit about eco kashrut, because I think that's something that a community could get behind.
Okay.
Makes sense.
So 20 years ago, because I just resigned, 20 years ago, Reb Zalman asked me to be the mashgiach, the certifier of kashrut for Ohala at the conference, and any other expanded things of retreats like Ruach HaAretz that was originally part of the Jewish Renewal. When Zalman asked me that, I said, what standard do you want of kashrut? Because there are standards, and they're different. And he said, from time to time, for our conferences, I'll be inviting an Orthodox rabbi. So that's part of the answer. The second part was, I inquired of him. I said, seeing as how you originated the term eco-kashrut, then do you mind if I combine the two so that Jewish renewal be an expression of backward compatibility with kashrut laws and forward thinking about eco-kashrut? And he said, you have my blessing. Eco-kashrut says that we have to be related to what is growing, both in animal and in vegetables and fruits. And so many years ago, he and Rabbi Arthur Waskow enunciated some initial principles, and that's in animal husbandry. Veal, which can be kosher, is treif. It's not kosher anymore. Why? Because the manner in which you produce veal is that you keep the calf in a box until you're ready to slaughter it, which is not very long in life, and it never gets outdoors. It cannot be bruised, so it's kept in a box. So he was right about that. Pesticides on fruits and vegetables, it makes that stuff treif. All right. So I began to expand the notion of eco-kashrut. And I had talked to Reb Arthur and Reb Zalman about allowing me to explore the expansion of the concept and keep in touch with them about where it's going. And they were more than happy to do that. So investigating the difference between wild caught fish and farmed fish. You cannot just say all farmed fish is trafe, all right? Because there's a difference in the way that they are raised and the potential need for them of the dwindling supplies of wild caught fish. So that's about what eco-kashrut is. So if you want to have, now get the language, a spiritual practice about what you eat, it goes beyond gluten, it goes beyond a lactose intolerant. It is a daily spiritual practice of being in connection with source, the source of the animal, how it was raised, right? And so I would work with hotels. This was the first Ohala conference in 20 years that I didn't supervise the koshering of the place and the type of food. But the two people who did were trained by me when I told the organ. And so they did a wonderful job, all right? Not just quality of the taste of food, but the source of the food. We met with the people at the hotel and we said, this is our principles. This is what the participants are expected to be able to know, that holiness is involved in every meal. So that's what eco-kashrut, and it continued to expand. I mean, one final thing.
Yeah, listen, I hope that some of the folks here on the call who may not be familiar with some of this terminology, I hope you're keeping an eye on the chat because we're defining a lot of these words we're throwing.
Thanks. Yeah.
So now, but eco-kashrut is like a Jewish mindfulness practice using food, which is something that we spend a lot of our time dealing with and thinking about. So why not make it, a spiritual practice?
So there's one other part that's connected to that, and it is not that easy to connect to what you just said. And I haven't figured it out yet. And that is when we were rabbis in the Aquarian Minyan in Berkeley in the late 90s, the board of rabbis decided that they wanted to have a campaign to convince Jews in the East Bay to keep kosher. And they wanted a rabbi from each of the denominations to form a committee to work this out. So somehow I got to be the Jewish Renewal rabbi. And when we met, I said, I will not support this unless eco-kosher is also part of the program. So the Orthodox rabbi, wonderful person, said, what is it? So I knew that he was the supervisor of kashrut for all the kosher establishments, the restaurants and the small grocery stores that sold kosher products in the East Bay. So I said to him, and Reb Zalman and Arthur had never come up with this concept, claiming it for myself. It also means economic kashrut. Why is it that when you all go in to buy your matzah or your gefilte fish for Pesach, the price is doubled, quadrupled, even more? I said to the Orthodox rabbi, you know the sources in the Mishnah Torah that says that that's illegal. It's illegal to gouge people. Something going on in Los Angeles right now as a result of the fires. All right, Maimonides was absolutely clear about this. I said, so what are you going to do about it? And he said, you're right. He said, it's gotten so bad that you pay double the price for olive oil to have a hechsher for a certification that it's kosher for Pesach. And olive oil is the one item of all food items that never has to have a kosher symbol because it's axiomatic kosher from Jewish history about the Maccabees and things like that. So he said he was going to tell his congregation, which was one of the large Orthodox congregations in the East Bay, that he was going to go to each one of the kosher establishments and tell them, no price gouging this year. I'm watching. All right. So that how to link that to spiritual practice is a challenge. The last thing is my first social activism in my life was when I was an undergraduate in Los Angeles and the farm workers' strike had begun. So I had an opportunity to be in the presence of Cesar Chavez, to go to churches where he was speaking. And I learned about the degradation of farm workers. And so to be conscious of where you buy your food, who raises it, what companies are involved in it, is also part of the practice. So it's long-winded, but I think it has tremendous opportunities, and you don't need a rabbi to supervise it.
So basically, you're talking about being environmentally conscious. Everything from
Yes.
food is produced to how it's grown to how it's prepared, and also fairness in terms of prices for people who don't have very much money. So it's a whole web.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can we go back to what you were talking about in regards to prayer and essentially bringing prayer to life? Because I think that's one of the things that I have a real block with, is that prayer in the Jewish tradition to me is just reciting a bunch of words. Words that don't connect with me, A, because I don't understand Hebrew, and B, the English translation most of the time doesn't do a lot for me either. So how is that dealt with? Is it dealt with, in Jewish Renewal?
So one of the major contributions of both Heschel and Reb Zalman was what, in the area of what Reb Zalman coined the term Davanology, the study of praying, not the study of prayers, but the study of praying. Okay, and so your issue with the gobbledygook of hearing a foreign language when you're supposed to be engaged in a spiritual practice was very obvious to Reb Zalman. And that's why he got in trouble big time for the fact that early on, as far back as the early 60s, he was having an Orthodox congregation in Massachusetts, where he was the rabbi, praying in English to decent melodies, right? One of his cutest ones, when he first came out to Colorado, he read Friday Night Kiddush over the wine with the melody of Home on the Range. All right? So that was indicative of his work, that Hasidism, which has beautiful melodies, inspired him to do the same thing in Jewish Renewal. And some of the earliest Jewish Renewal rabbis, going back to the 70s, were minstrels on the West Coast, particularly from Northern California up through Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. And they're the ones that did prayers both in Hebrew and in English, the same prayer. So the prayer was repeated. That's something that is not done in most synagogues. From Chef Gold's chanting to standard prayers in a Sabbath service of repetition. Right? Give me a story. When I was growing up in this ultra right-wing conservative synagogue in Spokane, Washington, and as I was learning Hebrew, the congregants were mostly European refugees. And all of them could pray at supercilious speeds. I mean, that's how I viewed it. They would finish in a rush. I went to my rabbi and I said, I can't keep up. And I keep trying, and I don't finish the prayer because they're on to the next one. And he said, don't worry about it. If one of the prayers speaks to you, just stop and let it speak to you. And so many, many times, more than I can count, I come to the concluding prayer in the Amida that's about peace. Grant peace. You're asking God to grant peace. So I always stop at that one and ask myself, where does peace need to reside? And in the years raising children, if they're having a spat, they're not getting along, then that's where the issue of peace arises in me. And to make a commitment to try to solve the issue. So Shalom Bayit, which is a Jewish principle of peace in the home, the operative life that we all experience in our house. So that's one aspect of prayer. But prayer is movement. Prayer is song. So you combine the entire body. It says in the book of Psalms that all your limbs and muscles and everything are engaged in praising God. So why do we sit in pews or on uncomfortable chairs for a couple hours all the time? Get up and move, all right? And express yourself in other forms other than words coming out of your mouth. Express it through art, through music. One of the cool things our synagogue in Boulder has been since 2003, sharing space with a Lutheran church. When they have their service on Sunday, they have in the back of the sanctuary where there's an open space away from the pews, a bunch of low-lying tables and chairs. And the kids sit there quietly drawing, using all sorts of crayons, paper, and what were they called? The things that the pipe cleaners, all sorts of things. And some of them actually say that they're listening to the prayers and they catch a few words and they're trying to describe it. All right, why aren't we doing things like that? Yeah. Why do we sit and just verbalize all the time?
So I would say, yeah, the Renewal movement has made great strides in renewing prayer. Ari and Wendy, I know you were going to say something, and then Laura.
Yeah, thank you, Reb Victor. See if I get my hand down here.
Don't worry about it.
Hand, okay. Paulette, I want to share that, one of the things that historically we've learned about prayer in our history was from the Baal Shem Tov in the 18th century. And, reading Rabbi Bert Jacobson's book about the Baal Shem Tov, it was so critical. There's the outside of prayer. He taught there's the outside of prayer, and then there's the inside of prayer. And the outside of prayer is all the stuff in the prayer books, all the Hebrew that you wind up saying, what is that? But then there's the inside of prayer. And the Baal Shem Tov, which, he became the founder of Hasidism and Jewish mysticism as it's practiced today. he had all kinds of stories about the inside of prayer. One story was the story of Moshe the apple seller. No putting down on you, Moshe, but this is Moshe the apple seller. So a bunch of distinguished rabbis came to him for Shabbos to spend Shabbos. And afterwards, they said, Rabbi, we learned so much about praying from you. This has really been wonderful. And the Baal Shem Tov said, what do I know about prayer? I'll take you to someone who really knows about prayer, Moshe the apple seller. So the next Friday, late afternoon, right just before the sun setting, they go to the marketplace. And everybody's, it's a Jewish community, so everybody's selling the last of their wares so they can go home and get ready for Shabbos. But Moshe the apple seller, he was wheeling and dealing and selling apples like mad. And suddenly he looks around and the place is empty. Why? Because the sun is set. And in those days, you don't do that stuff. You don't sell after the sunset on Friday. So he's heartbroken. And he's standing all alone in the marketplace. The Hasidim are hiding behind the bush watching him. Moshe the apple seller says, God, Rabbanu Shel Olam, I'm so sorry that I'm late. I'm so sorry that I'm late to be with you. And then he thinks about it and he says, but God, you're late also. We've been waiting for the Mashiach. We've been waiting for salvation all these years, and the world is still so messed up. Then he looks up and says, God, I'll make a deal with you. I won't be late anymore if you won't be late anymore either. Moshe the apple seller. The Baal Shem Tov looks at all the distinguished rabbis and he says, I wish that for once in my life, I could pray like Moshe the apple seller. So, these stories teach us we can do whatever our practice is, but what is real prayer? And that's what Judaism is about, and that's especially what Jewish Renewal is about today.
Nice. Thank you for that.
And beautiful, Aryeh. And one of the things I look back now after all these years and say the preparation I had for Aryeh, who I met in 1997 when he was the leader of the council, the board of the Aquarium Minyan, was that a number of years before, with this congregation, independent congregation that Nadia and I led for 12 years in Los Angeles, was one year I decided I wasn't going to teach Torah in the standard form. I was going to tell stories. So for 1 year, every Friday night, we had services every Friday night and every Saturday. I told stories. Most of them were Hasidic stories. But one of the things I discovered, because I was telling the stories, it wasn't until I really met a storyteller like Aryeh, who Aryeh's stories are the interior of the prayer. Give that some consideration, because that isn't so much Jewish renewal as it is something that comes down to us actually from some Torah stories through the Talmud. That's how Midrash came into being. They were storytellers, all right? And then the Hasidim, all right, told stories. And so
and the Kabbalists, don't forget the Kabbalists, right?
The Kabbalists were great. They told the story. They were still trying to figure out what the meaning of it was. But yeah, and so that's why one of the things I like so much about Amichai Lau-Levi and Rabshul is that Amichai Lau-Levi, before he became a rabbi, was a storyteller, and he trained people to be storytellers. And one of the last classes that I taught in the Renewal seminary was Hasidic stories for transformation. Because what I discovered about the stories was this, that the rabbi wasn't always the good guy. It was many times the chassid, the follower, who called the rabbi on the carpet, so to speak. And so that's what is so important, is to figure out what's the transformative principle working in the story. And there are stories, I'll paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, God loves stories. That's why there's so many of them, all right? And in every culture, there are stories. And so being around Reb Zalman in the last 14 years of his life in Boulder, that I heard so many stories. And it was like whatever he was teaching, no matter how deep it was or how Kabbalistically expansive it was, he'd always, it's a story I need to tell you. And as a result of the story, you got the interior of the word teaching. So think about what prayer can do if you can penetrate with a story of how these things work itself out in individual. That's what spirituality is.
Sweet. Beautiful said. Now I see Laura's got her hand up. Let's see what's going on.
Hi. Okay. So keeping all these stories in mind and coming back to prayer, what is prayer for those of us who don't believe in God and the essence of these stories?
You know, first of all, the Hebrew word for prayer is a reflexive word. In other words, it isn't out, it's in. It's a test within. How do I measure up? Not to God. How do I measure up as a human being? Right? So many of the prayers and so many of new prayers. When I speak of prayer, I do not speak exclusively of a prayer book. I speak of the expression in various forms, not just words, of yearning, of hope, of expectations about the life I'm living, the world I'm living it in. All right? That is prayer. All right?
And also gratitude,
Yes, absolutely. Zalman always used to say, quite correctly, based upon the Orthodox prayer book, is gratitude in the morning, forgiveness at night. All right? And that's not from the prayer book necessarily. Reb Zalman knew that I had real problems with prayer. So Laura, don't worry, some rabbis do too. And so we talked about it a lot. But at a certain point, after years of dialogue with Zalman, he finally called me up and said he'd like to see me. And I drove across town, went down, and he looked at me and he said, I want you to stop praying from a prayer book. Goodbye. He sent me on my way. Nothing else. All right. So when I got home, I said to myself, I don't want to meditate. I'm not a great meditator. Right? And I don't know what I'm going to do. All right. One of the things that I was taught in the late 90s from Bert Jacobson of blessed memory was the spiritual practice of silence. And I really like sitting in silence. All right. But I said, I've been doing that, but that's not what Zalman's aiming at. So the next day I got up before the sun got up, and I went outside and I faced where the sun would come. And all of you know, first light is not when the sun comes up. With first light, there's a tree behind me in our neighbor's yard, big tree, and it's always filled with birds, even in the wintertime. And at first light, I'm standing there facing first light, and behind me, the birds wake up and they start chirping. All right. So I said this is my Walt Whitman moment. You really went with it. And then when the sun started coming up and the birds got louder and louder, I realized what they were doing was greeting the day in a way that I just hadn't figured out how I could do it. And then I took what Reb Zalman had been teaching for so many years, and when he said, every day at the beginning, after you express gratitude, you ask, how should I be deployed today? And I asked that question, and the answer I got was to go inside, because it was already really cold, and go up to my computer, bring up the calendar, see who I'm going to be talking to that day, and begin the process of preparing to be able to receive that person in the best way possible. So I did that, and I kept doing it. A couple weeks later, the phone rings, and it's Reb Zalman. And he says, so new? I knew exactly what he wanted. So I told him of this practice. And they're silent. I'm going, maybe he doesn't think much of it. And he finally, in a very poor imitation of an English accent, he says, carry on, and hangs up on me. All right? So I still do that practice. All right? Because is it prayer? Let's worry less about the term and what we imagine the practice is. All right? I grew up with traditional prayer, putting on tefillin, wearing the talis. That's not my life anymore. It's expanded much more. I'm thankful to my teachers, Heschel and Zalman and others, but I'm also thankful for experiences in life, discovering love with my partner, love with my children. All that is a prayer that's being uttered all the time. If it isn't, got to do some tikkun work, repair.
Beautiful. I think we're onto something here. I at least I feel like I'm onto something with this renewal, and it's even still hard for me to explain what it is or why it appeals so much to me. But I know after reading Bert's book, I just know that, I agree with just about everything he said, and how it connects back to, Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov, and Kabbalah, and tradition going back long before that as well. So it's just somehow it helps me to feel more connected, and the music has been great, and the fellowship. I mean, I don't usually use that word, but I really felt it here. So one question I'm going to ask, and as we wrap up, is I know that we spoke, Victor, about what does it mean to be a renewal congregation, and does it mean that that one needs to affiliate with the organizational body known as Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal Congregations? So I don't know. What's your attitude toward that?
Well, I'm a little biased on this, but I'll give the answer. No, you don't have to join anybody or any organization. I don't particularly care that much for organizations. My life experience has been one of great disappointment in organization. If there's a congregation, I mean, look, I grew up in the conservative movement. They're well organized. And the congregations are paying a great deal of dues to a central organization for which they receive minimal in return. All right, so that's one part. But that I could say is true about most denominations, even in Christendom, as I talk to Christian priests and reverends and whatnot. So I'd say you want to be a renewal congregation. What you're really expressing is that a group of people are coming together in one of the more beautiful areas of California, because I know it well, to explore without the constrictions that denominational Judaism imposes or expectations. All right. And the exploration doesn't have a final date on it. And its beginning, middle, and end part changes all the time. It's not a consistent pattern. All right. And you bring in one other aspect is that it is not an avoidance of the world you live in outside of the Jewish world. Jewish renewal has been known to be active in social struggle, all right? And that's part of renewal. You cannot renew Judaism by being an escapist. You have to participate in the ongoing unfolding of the world. So that's another part. I mean, the first thing that we got engaged in when we came to Boulder in 2000 was going to a church to feed the homeless people and standing next to church people and our kids from our Jewish Renewal community and adults learning that this was part of our lives. So there's that aspect. It's not all about prayer, all right? And it also is about study, all right? Ignorance in the Jewish world is rampant. Superstition, nonsense, ill-informed, that's very common. So a commitment, and we've always been committed to study. The admonition starts in the Torah to study and to pay attention to these things, right? And I will tell you that sometimes there's a cost. If it's so easy, all right, then maybe it's not worth it. I mean, in your email, Moshe, that yes, I was kicked out of the conservative movement because Nadia and I officiated at a gay wedding when the conservative movement had not ruled on it, which meant they were against it. All right. And it was a very public in Los Angeles. It was in the Los Angeles Times because they were two prominent members of our congregation, lawyers. All right. And it was a confrontation with the no that religion said with the understanding of these two people who were in love. And there was no way around not doing it. All right. So you pay the price. All right. It didn't really hurt the price. All right. That was the freeing of being able to be an autonomous individual making decisions about the present time and truly being a rabbi to the congregation. All right. Yeah. And the congregation should expect the same of their leadership.
That's right.
That is something that renewal respects. All right. It's a back and forth that doesn't always exist in congregations.
Well, I'm grateful for your example and your leadership, and I know a lot of people here are as well. Next week, I'll be processing everything that you said and everything I've experienced here over the past 4 days. And then next week, we'll have a closing conversation, or at least the end of our first conversation. And Diane Bernstein will be our guest. She was the wife of late
Diane Elliott.
Diane Elliott, that's right. Thank you. the wife of Rabbi Bert Jacobson, of blessed memory. Yeah. So
and a wonderful yeah. Spiritual leader.
I have to say that book, reading that book recently, I think it changed my life because it got my attention and it said, "Whoa, this is really important." So
yes, and the fact that I've never read a book that's so self-effacing, so open, but that's Bert. I've known Bert since the 60s. And the fact that he can talk about his struggles in the way he does, you can feel that calmness for those who have known him, that calmness of his being, where he searches. And the first 45 pages is the same life I lived. And Bert knew it. We used to talk about it. So, yeah, it's a great, truly great book.
Yeah.
And I recommend it to everybody because it's what you're in your questions, you're searching. And the search is not always pleasant. Sometimes it's painful. And he does such an amazing job of describing that
That's right.
growth, which isn't always 2 steps forward. Sometimes it's 1 step back.
So I know I'm on a journey. I think we all are in one way or another, and it's good to be journeying together at this stage. So stick with us, and I'd love to hear your feedback. If you want to stick around right now and chat a little bit, we can. But otherwise, thank you, Rabbi Victor Gross, and please give our best to Nadia. I was just talking to Lori Klein here, who's a good friend, and I just told her we might see you tonight. So anyway,
Great, wonderful. Be well, everyone.
and you, I'm sure you know Rabbi Ephraim Eisen, right? Remember
I was
him?
his director of studies.
Well, you know, you've been talking to Paulette here. I don't know if you recognized her.
No, I don't.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I'm not good on names. I'm great on faces. So, yes, I understand he's really struggling with health issues right now, Ephraim.
He is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks
He
everybody.
used to do a lot
I'm
with
sure
his
he would have, if he could have, I'm sure he would have totally enjoyed listening in and into this session. So, but yeah.
Great. Thank you. And be well, everyone, and get through next Monday.
Thank you. Yes. All right. Thanks so
Bye
much,
bye.
Victor.
Amen.
Bye-bye.